Welcome, friends. Are you sitting comfortably? Today I would like to tell you the tale of a Scottish Highland ghost train. The Scottish Highlands, a place where mist clings to ancient mountains like spectral fingers, where valleys hide secrets older than memory, and where the wind carries whispers of those long gone. It's a land steeped in folklore, where the veil between worlds has always been thin. The remote railways that snake through these desolate landscapes were built in the late 1800s, cutting through wilderness that some locals believed should have remained untouched. These iron pathways connected isolated communities, but also, some say, opened passages to places beyond our understanding. It was in the summer of 2024 when Tom and Jimmy, both 40 years old, decided to embark on what they thought would be a rejuvenating camping holiday in the Highlands. Friends since childhood, they'd weathered life's storms together, marriages, divorces, career changes, but had never found time for the Highland adventure they'd dreamed about since university days. Tom was the practical one, a structural engineer with a methodical mind and a passion for history. His salt and pepper beard and weathered hiking boots spoke of occasional adventures, though fewer than he'd like. Jimmy was his counterpart in many ways, a freelance photographer with an artistic temperament and a tendency to chase the perfect shot regardless of danger. His lanky frame and perpetual smile masked a recent divorce that had left him seeking escape. They met at Glasgow Central Station on a surprisingly bright July morning, the grand Victorian architecture of the station contrasting with the modern bustle of travelers. The station clock read 10:17 a.m. as they purchased tickets for the Highland Explorer line, a remote route that would take them deep into the heart of the mountains to a tiny station called Halt, where they planned to begin their trek. Final call for the 10:30 Highland Explorer service to Inverness, calling at all stations, announced the tannoy, the voice echoing through the cavernous station. "That's us," Tom said, hoisting his heavy backpack. "Platform 7. The train that awaited them was surprisingly old-fashioned, a diesel locomotive pulling carriages that seemed from another era, with wood-paneled interiors and brass fittings that gleamed dully in the morning light. "Bit retro, isn't it?" Jimmy remarked as they settled into a compartment. "Thought everything would be all modern and sleek." "Heritage service," Tom replied, always the one with the facts. "They run these old trains in summer for the tourists. Adds to the experience." The carriage was half full, a mix of hikers, tourists, and locals. An elderly woman knitting something complex and gray, a family with 2 restless children, a solitary businessman absorbed in his laptop. Normal people on a normal journey. As the train pulled away from Glasgow, the urban landscape gradually gave way to rolling countryside, then steeper hills, and finally the dramatic mountains of the Highlands proper. The railway line hugged the contours of the land, sometimes running alongside locks so still they perfectly mirrored the surrounding peaks, sometimes plunging into tunnels carved through ancient rock. 3 hours into the journey, Tom checked his watch and frowned. "We should be nearly there by now," he muttered. "Let's ask the guard." They found him in the corridor, a thin man with a face so lined it resembled cracked leather, his uniform slightly too large for his frame. "Excuse me," Tom asked, "how much longer to Halt?" The guard's eyes, pale blue and somehow too bright, fixed on Tom with an unsettling intensity. "Craigdarroch," he repeated, his Scottish accent thick and difficult to decipher. "Aye, not long now. The old station comes when it's ready for you, not before." He smiled, revealing teeth that seemed too small and too numerous. "Rest while you can, gentlemen. The night comes quick in the Highlands." Jimmy laughed nervously as they returned to their seats. Friendly chap, wasn't he? The station comes when it's ready. These Highland folk and their superstitions. Tom didn't respond immediately, his eyes drawn to the window where the landscape was changing. The bright summer day was giving way to a premature dusk, clouds gathering with unnatural speed. "Did you notice his badge?" Tom finally said. "It had a date, 1954. "Probably part of the heritage experience," Jimmy replied, but his voice lacked conviction. The gentle rocking of the train, combined with the early start and the hypnotic rhythm of wheels on tracks, soon lulled both men into an unexpected sleep. Tom's last conscious thought was that the other passengers had grown strangely quiet. When they awoke, everything had changed. The carriage was empty, not just their compartment, but as far as they could see down the corridor. No elderly knitter, no family, no businessman. The lights flickered intermittently, casting strange shadows across the now worn upholstery that had somehow become faded and torn in places. Outside, full darkness had fallen. No gradual sunset, no lingering twilight, just impenetrable blackness punctuated occasionally by what might have been distant lights or merely reflections in the glass. How long were we asleep? Jimmy's voice cracked slightly. Tom checked his watch, then frowned and tapped it. Can't be right. Says it's just past noon. Jimmy pulled out his phone. No signal. And my phone says the same, 12:17 p.m. But it's clearly night outside. The train began to slow, the wheels screaming against the tracks with a sound like a wounded animal. Through the windows, they could make out the dim outline of a small station platform emerging from the darkness. This must be Craigdarroch, Tom said, though uncertainty tinged his voice. As the train ground to a halt, they peered out at the station. A single platform with a small shelter illuminated by one flickering lamp that cast more shadows than light. No station sign was visible. No staff. No other passengers waiting. I don't like this, Jimmy whispered. Where is everyone? Probably just a quiet rural stop, Tom reasoned, though he didn't sound convinced. Let's grab our bags. They collected their backpacks and moved to the door. It opened with a hydraulic sigh that seemed too loud in the silence. The air that rushed in was cold, far colder than a July evening should be, and carried a damp, earthy smell like freshly dug soil. As they stepped onto the platform, the train doors closed behind them with finality. They turned to see the guard, the same unsettling man from earlier, watching them through the window, his pale eyes reflecting the weak light unnaturally. He raised one hand in what might have been a wave or a warning, and then the train began to move, accelerating quickly into the darkness. And they were alone. The wind howled across the platform, carrying whispers that seemed almost like words. The single lamp flickered, threatening to extinguish completely with each gust. There should be a station building, or at least a path, Tom said, trying to maintain his practical approach. Let's look around. They moved cautiously along the platform, their footsteps echoing strangely. At the far end, a narrow path led away from the station and into a stand of twisted pines that loomed like sentinels in the darkness. This must lead to the village, Jimmy suggested, or at least to a road. They followed the path, the beam of Tom's flashlight carving a tunnel through the darkness. The trees seemed to lean inward as they passed, branches reaching like gnarled fingers. 10 minutes of walking brought them not to a village or road, but back to the same platform they had left. That's not possible, Tom muttered, shining his light on the familiar shelter and lamp. We walked in a straight line. They tried again, this time in the opposite direction, following another path that led away from the far end of the platform. Again, after walking for what seemed like the right amount of time to reach somewhere, anywhere else, they found themselves back at the same desolate station. Tom, Jimmy's voice was barely audible over the wind. Look at the platform. Tom followed his friend's gaze. Where before the platform had been empty, now indistinct figures moved in the shadows beyond the lamp's reach. Too distant to make out clearly, they seemed to shift and change as they watched, sometimes appearing as ordinary travelers with suitcases, sometimes as something less substantial, less human. "Hello," Tom called out, his voice swallowed by the wind. "Is anyone there?" The figures didn't respond, but seemed to retreat further into the darkness. "The train," Jimmy suddenly said, pointing. In the distance, lights appeared, the headlamp of an approaching train cutting through the night. As it drew nearer, they could see it wasn't the modern heritage train they had arrived on, but something much older, a steam locomotive, its chimney belching black smoke that merged with the night sky. The train slowed as it approached the station, steam hissing around its wheels. It was an ancient thing, its iron body pitted with rust yet somehow maintained, as if preserved in time rather than restored. The carriages behind it had windows that glowed with a sickly yellow light, and within those windows, faces pressed against the glass. pale, drawn faces with hollow eyes that tracked Tom and Mimi as the train crawled past. "Do we get on?" Jimmy whispered. Before Tom could answer, a voice called from behind them, the same thick Highland accent they had heard earlier. "You don't want to be doing that, gentlemen." They turned to find the guard standing there, though neither had heard him approach. Up close, his uniform was clearly not the modern one they had seen earlier, but an older style, complete with a peaked cap that shadowed his eyes. "That train isn't for the likes of ye," he continued. "That's the 10:30 from Craigdarroch to Inverness, the one that never arrived." "What do you mean?" Tom demanded. "What is this place?" The guard's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Don't you know? This is Craigdarroch Halt, last stop on the line for some, for others just a passing through." "That doesn't make any sense," Jimmy said, his photographer's eye noticing now that the guard cast no shadow despite standing directly in the lamplight. "Perhaps a history lesson then," the guard said, gesturing for them to follow him to the shelter. "Sit, gentlemen, we have time." Against their better judgment, they followed, finding the shelter's bench cold to the touch. "Craigdarroch Halt," the guard began, his voice taking on a rhythmic quality like a practiced tour guide, "was built in 1897 to serve the village that once stood 2 miles east of here, a prosperous little place, until the winter of 1954. He paused, looking at them expectantly. "What happened in 1954? Tom asked, unable to help himself. The 10:30 from Glasgow, carrying 67 souls, departed on schedule on December 17th. A heavy snowstorm was forecast, but the railway company was under pressure to maintain service. The train never reached Inverness. Search parties found no trace, no wreckage, no bodies, as if the train and all aboard had simply vanished into the Highland mist." The wind seemed to die down as he spoke, allowing his words to hang in the air. 3 months later, a local shepherd reported seeing lights on the abandoned line near Craigdarroch, a train moving silently through the night, stopping at the deserted platform, faces at the windows. The railway company dismissed it as superstition, but the sightings continued. Always the same train, always stopping here. "That's just a local legend," Tom said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Is it?" the guard replied. "Then why are you here, gentlemen? 2 travelers who boarded a summer service to the Highlands, only to arrive at a station that officially closed in 1967. Jimmy stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous. We fell asleep on the train and missed our stop. Or this is some elaborate tourist experience. Either way, we need to get to a real town. Call for help." The guard's expression didn't change. "You can try leaving again if you wish. The paths always lead back here. That's what happened to me and the others. We tried to leave, over and over, but Craigdarroch keeps what it catches." "You're saying you're from the missing train?" Tom asked, a chill running through him that had nothing to do with the night air. "Aye, Guard Robert McPherson at your service." He tipped his cap. 67 years I've been making this journey, watching for new passengers." As if on cue, the ghostly train that had passed earlier began to return, approaching from the opposite direction, moving just as slowly, the same pale faces pressed to the windows. "They come back every night," McPherson explained, hoping to continue their journey, hoping this time will be different. "And what happens if we board?" Jimmy asked, his eyes fixed on the approaching train. "Ye join them, forever traveling between stations that no longer exist, glimpsed occasionally by the living as lights in the Highland night." The train was drawing closer now, steam billowing across the platform. The faces in the windows seemed more distinct, men, women, children, all with the same hollow-eyed look of eternal transit. "There must be another way," Tom insisted. "We're not dead. We don't belong here." McPherson's expression softened slightly. "No, you don't. Not yet. That's why I'm telling you this. In 67 years, only 3 have escaped Craigdarroch's grasp." "How?" both men asked simultaneously. "The train stops for 3 minutes, no more. Those who realized their predicament and refused to board, who stood their ground as the train departed, found themselves back in their own time come dawn." "And those who boarded?" Jimmy asked. McPherson gestured to the approaching train. "They're still riding the rails between worlds." The train was pulling into the station now, its ancient brakes screaming. Up close, they could see the details that had been obscured at a distance. The peeling paint revealing the original 1950s livery. The windows clouded with decades of spectral condensation. The carriage doors that began to open of their own accord. The passengers inside didn't disembark, but their faces pressed harder against the glass, eyes fixed on Tom and Jimmy with a hunger that transcended death, the desperate longing of the trapped for new company in their eternal journey. 3 minutes, McPherson reminded them, stepping back into the shadows. Choose wisely. The train doors stood open, inviting. From within came sounds that hadn't been audible before. Conversation, laughter, the clinking of glasses from the dining car. It sounded warm, welcoming, a stark contrast to the cold, empty platform. We could just look inside, Jimmy suggested, taking a half step toward the nearest carriage. See if there's someone who can actually help us. Tom grabbed his arm. That's how they get you. Don't you see? They make you choose to join them. The wind had died completely now, leaving an unnatural stillness. The only sound was the gentle hiss of the waiting train, and from within, what might have been music. A popular song from the 1950s played on a distant gramophone. 1 minute gone, McPherson's voice called from the darkness. Jimmy pulled away from Tom's grasp. I just want to see, just a quick look. Before Tom could stop him, Jimmy had approached the nearest carriage, peering through the open door. His face lit up with surprise. Tom, it's different inside. It's warm and bright. There are people having dinner, normal people. I can see a table with 2 empty seats. Tom moved cautiously to his friend's side, looking past him into the carriage. What he saw made his breath catch. Not the inviting scene Jimmy had described, but rows of seats occupied by the translucent figures of the dead, their hollow eyes all turned toward the door, toward them. Jimmy, that's not what I'm seeing, he said urgently. They're showing you what you want to see. 2 minutes, came McPherson's warning. Jimmy had one foot on the step now. It's our way out, Tom. There's a conductor inside who says he can help us. Tom looked again and saw only the hungry dead, one of whom, a woman in 1950s dress, was extending a pale, insubstantial hand toward Jimmy in welcome. There's no conductor, Jimmy. It's a trick. But Jimmy was already climbing aboard, drawn by a vision Tom couldn't share. As his friend disappeared into the carriage, Tom lunged forward, grabbing Jimmy's backpack and pulling with all his strength. Jimmy turned, his face contorted with sudden anger. Let go! They're offering us help. They're offering us death! Tom shouted back, maintaining his grip. Look again, Jimmy. Really look! Something in Tom's voice must have reached him, because Jimmy hesitated, blinking rapidly as if clearing his vision. His expression changed from anger to confusion, then to horror. Oh God, he whispered. I see them now. With Tom's help, he stumbled backward off the train, both men falling onto the platform as the carriage doors began to close. 3 minutes, McPherson announced, materializing beside them. The train departs. The locomotive's wheels began to turn, steam billowing across the platform. As the train pulled away, the faces at the windows watched them with expressions of mingled disappointment and envy. Souls who had made the wrong choice decades ago, condemned to eternal transit through the Highland night. As the last carriage disappeared into the darkness, taking with it the unnatural stillness, the wind returned. Not the howling gale of before, but a gentler breeze carrying the scent of pine and heather. Ye chose wisely, McPherson said, his form already becoming less substantial in the pre-dawn light that was inexplicably beginning to illuminate the platform. When the sun rises, you'll find yourselves back where you belong. What about you? Tom asked. Can't you come with us? McPherson's smile was sad but resigned. My choice was made long ago. I stay to warn others when I can. It's my penance and my purpose. As the sky lightened further, the station around them began to change, the decrepit shelter transforming into a modern waiting area with plastic seating, the single lamp becoming a row of electric lights, the overgrown platform clearing of weeds and debris. McPherson's form was barely visible now, a suggestion of a figure rather than a solid presence. Remember Craig Darroch? His voice came faintly. Remember those who still ride the Highland ghost train? Perhaps someday, someone will find a way to free us all. And then he was gone, and they were sitting on a modern platform in the early morning light, their backpacks beside them, as a ScotRail service pull D into Craigdarroch Halt, now a small but well-maintained rural station. A few passengers disembarked, hikers and locals going about their normal business. A station attendant nodded to them as he passed, checking his watch. "You lads waiting for the 8:15 to Inverness?" he asked cheerfully. "Should be here in about 10 minutes." Tom and Jimmy exchanged glances, both pale despite the warm summer morning. "Actually," Tom said slowly, "I think we might explore the local area instead." As they gathered their belongings and headed toward the exit, Jimmy paused, looking back at the tracks. "Do you think anyone would believe us if we told them?" Tom considered this, watching as the modern train pulled away, heading north toward Inverness along the same route the ghost train had traveled. Some might. The Highlands are full of stories like ours, but most would call it a dream or a hallucination. "And what do you think it was?" Jimmy pressed. Tom's gaze lingered on the now empty tracks, where for a moment, just a moment, he thought he saw the shimmer of something not quite substantial, the echo of wheels on rails that had fallen silent decades ago. "I think some journeys never end," he said quietly, "and some trains never reach their destination." As they walked away from Craigdarroch Halt, neither man noticed the small brass plaque affixed to the station building, newly installed but made to look aged, commemorating the 67 souls lost on the Glasgow to Inverness service of December 17, 1954. Beneath the list of names, a final line had been added overnight. "And for those who chose to remain, that others might find their way home."
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more.